and I was completely um, irresponsive to people trying to call my name. Prior to that, I felt myself ascending to this endless euphoria of light that I knew was, the epicenter of all of creative force, which some would call God or the center of the universe. But it was just, sometimes in life we have experiences, but there almost seems to be a cap of how good we can feel because we're still bio-neural physiological beings. And on the other side, there was no limitation of euphoria. Really, people who are tuned in understand that imagination is reality.
Mm,
But we're taught that regurgitation is reality and to not imaginate. And if you do have an imagination, you need to be medicated. Um, you know, but I will always really reflect that at anything. This conversation right now was an imagination. Someone was able to really think of Zoom, the internet, computers, chairs, all of reality was once an imagined thought. So
mhm.
we all are living in an imagination.
I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of The Soul Inspired. Today we have Jacob Cooper with us. He is a near-death experiencer and he's a general therapist. We're going to talk to him today about his experiences and just get more information on him. So thank you so much, Jacob. I appreciate you taking the time to be on The Soul Inspired today.
Thanks, Joe. Love your channel. I'm very inspired from every part of my being, including my soul, with the work that you do and the impact that you're already having on your podcast. So it's an honor to be here with you.
Well, I appreciate that. I generally always start around looking at yourself as a child. I kind of go back a little bit, and I try to find out who little Jacob was, the type of person you were growing up, before you got into the things you're doing and the experience that you had. And so I just want to know if, who you are today reflects who you are as a child. Just kind of dig into that a little bit if you could.
I love being having the tables being turned on me and to get into psychoanalytic work. But that's a great question, Joe, in a sense that the childhood, I think every person, if you go in a classroom, you'll say like, name one thing about yourself. Most people will say I'm different, in that study. Not always, but kids want to be normal, but adults like to be different in a way. But my childhood is very different in a sense that I had a profound near-death experience at just the age of 3 years old, which completely altered the trajectory, of my development. And it was a very unconventional just trajectory that I experienced that forever changed my outlook and, my life. But, as a kid, it was something that I didn't necessarily see as a blessing. It felt more of a burden than anything from, a lot of the NDE, near-death experience after effects that I had, from it, as well as just the complexity that it, provided to have such privy awareness to all these things, that are around us on the other side, and then being have to reintegrate, into the world post Mandy was a challenge for sure.
Okay, so question about that. So I didn't know it was at such a young age. So 3 years old, you have the NDE. Did you at the time, it might be hard to remember, but do you recall remembering and knowing it right at that age, or was this something that came back to you as you got older? Because memories are a little faded sometimes as children. So I'm wondering if it came back to you more as you aged, or if you do recall living your childhood knowing this experience happened.
Not only did I remember that, a lot of my infancy post my NDE, I recall myself being on the other side after my NDE and being on the other realm more so than this realm, which is very common for near-death experiencers, where they have a yearning or a connection to the other side, more so of this side. But, there comes a certain point where we have to integrate in the spirit realm directs us. You're 100% right that, most conventional memory is limited, once you reach that, those infancy years. But this was not an experience that was filtered through conventional memory. It happened through my higher mind in the spirit realm. And so, for instance, a lot of kids have memories of past lives, past lifetimes. They may not remember what they did that day or that
Mm.
week. And
Right.
so there's a different memory that is of the soul imprint memory, that we have, or you call it the subconscious mind, that we are privy to versus, memories that happen within our linear mind, and so there is a dichotomy, that I feel strongly about. But not only that, trauma was a big component of my recollection of my near-death experience. As a therapist, trauma could certainly have its disassociative, parts where, as a self-protective defensive mechanism, it's kind of pushed away from memory. But also, trauma could have a very clear recollection, of the events. I'll ask, many people around the world, like, where were you September 11th? And you'll pretty much know exactly where you were, but I'll
Right.
say 9/13, 9/14, no idea. So things that are very strong of an imprint in this life, much like things that are very strong from an imprint when you may connect to the spirit realm, you have the capacity to never leave you. So it was something that was always with me. Just the capacity, though, to put it into words and have the linguistics for it, that took quite some time, which is, very congruent with near-death experience research, which will say that usually takes around 1 to 2 decades for infants and children to fully verbalize, make sense, and process their NDEs. And that was pretty spot on. It took me, about, yeah, I would say almost 2 decades to really fully verbalize the experience. And I still don't feel that I'm there, as words are a very limiting tool when
Hmm.
talking about things on the other side, which we could get into in a little bit too, as to why that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to dig into what happened, but I was gonna say I've said this before. I find this with near-death experiencers that had it as a child. When you're a child and you have things going on in your life, whether it's trauma, it could be actual like family related trauma, it could be all kinds of different things. In those moments, a lot of the times, even though they're not great moments, when you're a child, a lot of times you're considering this is just normal. This is my normal. So if you
Yeah.
have a near-death experience as a child, you're like, oh, well, this is what people do. A lot of people have a near-death experience. Like that's just the mindset a lot of the times when you're younger until you kind of grow
Sure.
up and see the world the way it is. And you go, wait a second. And that could be why it takes a while for people to actually process what happened because you're not really digging in at the same sense. You're just like, oh yeah, that was an experience I had, and let's see when that happens again. But many of us probably go through our life hoping
Yeah.
we never have an NDE. But my point is that that could be one of the reasons why, because it just became part of your norm, and to hear that you actually had experiences where, and I want to find this out how this transpired, but where you kind of, it almost sounded like the way you said it is you had one foot in, one foot out a couple times. Like, I don't know
Mhm.
if you had like the main near-death experience and then always kind of felt like you were in and out for a while as you grew up.
Yeah, I was very much between two worlds. In my infancy and childhood years, which again, very common for near-death experiencers. But I'd say if the spirit realm didn't want you to remember it, you probably would forget it, but you were meant to remember it
Mm,
if you do. Not per se just for yourself, but for the meaning behind it and the purpose that it has through sharing it to other people. Um, but I would say it was something that was always there. No matter how hard I tried to push the beach ball down, it always come back to the surface. And
right.
uh, but it was a rude awakening for me. I just remembered being in preschool where I was having a lot of intuitive interdimensional communication, which again, I don't remember almost anything about my infancy or childhood other than these higher realm experiences.
Mm,
And I was really having those experiences, and I just remembered, turning to a classmate asking if you were able to see what I saw, and the classmate just had this bewildered look, and that lasted for a while, just this theme of feeling like I am the only one who can see this, and the world that I felt like I once knew was
Mm,
turned upside down, and the people that I just kind of relied on, my parents, I felt were, didn't understand the world that I was in, that I was
yeah.
connected to. Even my father told me that after my NDE, I came up to him and I said, like a little bit after, I said, no, one day you'll understand what happened to me, but for now, when I went to the hospital, you won't understand. And he just recently told me that, which is pretty cool. I didn't recognize I said that. I don't remember saying that. But
Wow.
my father's also a therapist, and he's not, woo-woo. He's very, you know, he's not going to make anything up. What you see is what you get, kind of thing. So
Right. Right.
I'll take his word for it. Yeah.
That's amazing. You had such an insight at such a young age that probably even I bet you at that point probably shook him a little bit. Like, wow, that was something must have happened, like for him to
Yeah.
for a child to say something like that. So you felt like an outcast, almost like a minority at such a young age, and you felt different than others as you progressed in your age because you started saying things. I can relate, but I didn't have an NDE. I would question people's behaviors as a kid, and
Mhm.
my friends would look at me like, "Are you okay?" Like, if someone was being mean to someone, I'd be like, why did you do that?
Yeah.
Whereas most kids weren't doing that. So I had some kind of inner insight to something greater, but I don't know. And maybe I would say maybe there was something that did happen and I wasn't meant to remember it. Like I
Mhm.
don't, to this day, I don't know. There are days where I wonder if I had an NDE myself, why the fascination, why the obsession through the years that I've held on to this, and in my teenage years, it really became strong. And
Mhm.
I still don't know why that is, but it's just something that's always been there. But let's dig in a little bit. So at 3 years old, what was going on? Did you have like a health ailment or what? How did it, can you maybe lead into what happened? And we'll go through the process of what the near-death experience was like.
Yeah, my parents didn't know this at the time, but I had a condition called pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough, which was later, diagnosed at the hospital, that I was transported to by an ambulance, but I had whooping cough, and otherwise known as pertussis, which for infants or children, even adults, could lead to fatalities, or quite severe, illness. So I had pertussis. I was in a playground and completely suffocated as a result of whooping cough, and that was the scariest moment of my life was suffocation. You think about a breath, unless you're on a ventilator, which even then is questionable, as we saw during the pandemic, it keeps us going. And if you don't have the breath, like, there's no oxygen, there's no life here in the physical. And so that was yanked, from me, and I was just completely suffocated. My body, was beginning to really shut down, as if you take power breakers in a home and just shutting them one unit at a time due to the deprivation of oxygen. And the last thing I remember feeling was just my brain and being aware of it. And then I just felt a tremendous crack within my brain due to the deprivation of oxygen and suffocation. And once my brain cracked open, that's when God came in, as they say, and the spirit realm really, you know, just blossomed and unfolded right in front of my very eyes, at that moment. But it was through surrender in many ways that was a saving grace where I let go of the struggle to breathe in a human sense, and I was able to surrender to the breath of eternity, which is what we're all created from. So
Wow.
from losing my human breath and all that made me human, I recognized I was not that. That what kept us going was this breath of eternity that we all have and our connection to that, eternal grace.
Wow. Before you say what happened next, I was going to say what triggered me there, and it didn't trigger me, but I had a reflection
I,
of
I apologize. I'm supposed to be a therapist, not triggering people,
no,
right?
no, of course you're not triggering, but it actually brought back the idea of if you think about birth, right? The child comes out of the womb and comes out and takes that first breath,
Yeah.
and they have to struggle to get that first breath. I'm assuming because they are coming from a different piece of their own existence. We're all coming from this area where we weren't needing to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
We come out and we have to take that first breath.
Mm-hmm.
The way you've just described that is it's almost like you had to take a spiritual breath, like you had to let go of something and breathe into something different, which is really interesting. Not breath, but do you know what I mean?
Right.
It's same kind of metaphor because you were letting go. You had to suffer through and let go in order to go to the next stage. Is that the
Yeah.
way I'm taking it, or am I
Yeah. Well,
counting that wrong?
you look at almost the Webster's dictionary, and just a logical explanation of death, it's a complete ending. So to have any continuity past that is illogical. But I've learned really death is a rebirth, it's not an ending, it's a continuity, it's an expansion, and the soul has liberation. There's no limitations of the soul, in dying. There may be some limitations in living, and I think that's what a lot of these near-death experience narratives could hopefully illustrate to viewers.
Wow. So you could actually feel that your brain was shutting down, like your body was shutting down,
Yeah.
and you broke out of this. No, and with did you have a knowingness of familiarity at that point when you broke out? I'm wondering if what happened next, but did it feel familiar?
Yes, it certainly did, but it was overwhelming. It was a big adjustment.
Mm.
It was welcomed, but you think about it, it's like you're used to driving at 10 miles an hour and all of a sudden your car accelerates to like 500, 1,000 miles an hour. You're like, you might have driven that way before and, but it's just a big transition,
Mhm.
um, that I felt. And so it took a little bit of time to really acclimate, in a way. And some of the things that I was seeing, it was just like, yes, it's familiar, but also, holy, you know what? This is like right in front of me. And it was familiar yet overwhelming. I think two things could be true at the same time. But I was experiencing this not limited by the chronological age of 3 years old. This was an experience of the soul, which I do believe all of life is. We're all eternal witnesses and observers of life with an eternal soul, just temporarily experiencing ourselves in our
Mm.
bodies, in our ages, in our cultures, and temporarily in this lifetime. That's often a question that's asked. It's like, you're just 3 years old, what do you know? And I would say honestly, most infants and kids probably are more connected to the spirit realm than most seasoned adults because they're just
Right.
coming from there, and there's more of a familiarity and less of a programming, the human contextual viewpoint that could, have some barriers, and a lot of people just really existing in their left brains of reality and just kind of blocked off from the two worlds.
I've been saying that forever. I have three children, and I noticed with all three of them when they were really young. I have a just 2-year-old
Yeah.
now, but my son, especially when he was really little, he would do the strangest things. He would be looking up all the time in corners and laughing and
Mm.
talking and babbling and almost like in a different place.
Yeah.
He's not like that now, but at the time, I think because they're so close to that other side, that it's just that's almost more real than here at first until they kind of come here and get used to what they're doing here. It would be in the same sense, it's a lot of NDEers I talk to who pass and they come out of their bodies and they haven't yet moved to the light, let's say. And we'll talk about what some of
Mhm.
what you experienced, but in a way, they're almost stuck here still a little bit. They're kind of looking
Right.
around, they're seeing their family, they're still kind of like attached to this world until they
Mhm.
decide, okay, my soul's I'm enough of this. I don't want that anymore. But it's the same sense. You come here. I kind of always see everything as kind of like a reflection. Like
Mhm.
things here are like a reflection of there. Like, so you're here, you're born. And I would assume they are seeing parts of who they are bigger than what we start to become as we get older because we get,
Mhm.
I don't know, attached to this world. So again, I haven't had an experience, so I'm just assuming based on the people I've talked to, but that's kind of the way I see it. Did you when you came out, you said it was overwhelming. I love the way you described it, how it would be like going from a slow car to a fast car or whatnot, like just a complete different change. What
I don't think any car, I would almost say more so like the fastest possible roller coaster ride
right?
times an infinite amount, and that's kind of what it felt like. But it felt like it was just going upwards and upwards to infinite euphoria with no beginning, no middle, no end, no
Wow.
limitations. Uh,
were you in a tunnel of light or anything, or what was it that you were seeing?
I did experience that when, my crossing over experience certainly, which
Mhm.
is highlighted by my friend Dr. Raymond Moody's, one of the criteria of near-death experience that he highlighted in Life After Life when he, when he made the term, devised the term NDE.
Mhm.
But this phenomenon, as Raymond will illustrate, has been going on for thousands of years. But the term NDE is a very, relatively new term, which he was able to really diagnose. But yeah, the tunnel certainly was there. Crossing over into the light was there, which is interesting because Raymond will say that that descriptive is more so that things that people from the West describe for whatever reason.
Mhm.
Uh, maybe that's just our terminology. I mean, for instance, spirit guides are usually a term that people in the West use, and guardian angels, people like in UK, I find them using. It's like, I don't know, you want to call it England or UK, Great Britain, it's all kind of the same thing, just different verbiage.
Right.
So, yeah,
Right. So we have different descriptions of what is actually happening, but
right.
a lot of people I think see it. And then there are the people who don't have the light. They're all of a sudden in heaven, or they're like, I get so many different people I talk to. They have these different experiences. And I wonder
Yeah.
sometimes why that is. I'm not sure, or maybe the memory is a little shifted, because, things are, but again, I love also in the beginning of this talk, you said it was a different type of memory. I've been saying this for a while. It feels
Mhm.
like, when people are describing it and I ask the question, do you remember it like you remember going to the store last week, or do you? I
Mhm.
know like it's a completely different form of memory. There is still some people who will say some of the memory has kind of vaguely gone, but it could be
Mhm.
just jaded by the brain. Who knows? It could be something that we're just
Yeah.
forgetting, but it's a different type of memory. So, in your instance, you somehow remembered the tunnel. You do recall having that.
I remember every single event of my NDE outside of one, which is the exact names of my spirit guides. At the moment, I knew their names loud and clear. And now I just kind of call them the guides, but that's like the one thing that it is, if I could pinpoint like one particular detail that isn't as clear, it's their specific names
Hmm.
for whatever reason. And that's not that, from talking to a lot of mediums and intuitives, it's not as important to get the full range of details of their names. You could just call them guides, the guides, and that's kind of what I've called them throughout my life. Um, so that is how, if I could pinpoint one thing, slip my mind, that would be about it. But other than that, I mean, I cannot believe that it's been, I'm gonna reveal my age right now, 31 years since I've had this experience because in so many ways it felt like yesterday.
Mhm.
And I didn't really talk to my parents that much about it, but I would go on interviews and I would be my own biggest skeptic about this thing because I thought I was 4 or 5 years old. Like, no way in hell I was three. But I talked to my parents, they're like, no, you were three. I'm like, I thought kids in preschool are 4 or 5. I didn't, so it
Yeah.
was like, wow, I was like, I was 3 years old. I didn't believe that was possible for a 3-year old myself to have this. And it felt like a second ago. So that just shows you the funny thing about time,
Hmm.
how it's a blink of an eye, in this life, certainly. But, back to memory, I do believe that I'm not alone in that. I think people tuning into your station, people like yourself, have a gift of memory or a sense that there's something familiar that end ears are talking about, which evokes a memory that happened long ago before we got into this life.
Hmm.
A memory of ourselves between lives on the other side, something that we may not be able to consciously explain. But if it wasn't familiar, then I don't think as many people would be tuning into these things. There's something that is tickling the soul about NDEs that's causing this incredible boom of interest and mass, mainstream attention these days. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I love the way you said that. Because it's true. There's something there that I can't quite recall, but I always say it's kind of like it feels right. So, and people are
yeah,
explaining these experiences to me, and when people go over their overview of what happened, there's almost like a sense of familiarity for me. And I'm thinking, why am I familiar with that?
right.
Um, So I guess that makes sense. And so, and there are probably a lot of the audience that tune in that are like, yeah, that makes sense. That feels right. So it's about what feels right, right? Like if it feels
Yeah.
right, what is that telling you? So, would you be able to give kind of just even a general overview? I know actually before you do, because you did mention that you've written a book, but is the book around the experience or was it around other things that have gone on in your life?
Yeah, I published two books with a company in California called Waterside Publishing, Waterside Production. My first book is called Life After Breath, and the second book is called The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. In both books, Life After Breath I view more as my karma of my NDE, and if you're familiar with karma, it's more of the story, that we have, the narrative that we have, something we walked into. And there's a little bit of dharma, but it's a lot of karma. It's more of a memoir of my NDE. And the wisdom of Jacob's Ladder is more the dharma, which is the essence, the meaning, the lessons,
Mm,
the integration, from it. So for now, those are my two books. I really would like to publish more, but I just, surrender to the universe and I just say, make me instrument for thy will, and wherever thy need is, thy desire is, I'm there. So,
yeah.
but for now, those are the two books that I published in the span of around 3 years,
Wow.
um, which is fascinating in a sense that you know, just as a regular human being, was put in the lowest possible level in community college for reading and writing that weren't even accredited courses. Um, I remember applying to high schools that my sister was top tier student, and the principal took one look at my writing and said, "This is not appropriate at all." And, I'm not kind of doing this for trying to date myself, but I think for viewers to understand that, when someone might have a limited judgment of you, that's not a reflection of your power. That's more of their limitations and what they can see. And I think we're all unlimited beings, and through the power of belief, our behaviors have a big relationship with. And to
Wow.
achieve, you got to believe, and that really was a big part of getting these, what I call my babies out. I don't have any kids,
Yeah.
but I, I give my power to you. I have a brother who's got a couple kids, and my Lord, it's those early couple years could be challenging. There's no floor or bottom where a kid said, "Hey, Dad is a little bit tired. I'm gonna go easy on him, not wake him up 10, 15 times a night."
Right.
But yeah, these books are my babies. That's the way I see them.
Well, I love that, and they should be. Like I said earlier, when we first started talking today about because I'm a songwriter, and it's these are pieces of you coming out on paper, pieces of you coming out on pen, pieces of you coming out on in writing, and so and I love that's a powerful message. If people limited beliefs, unfortunately, when you're younger, it's much easier to have a limited belief put on you and you believe it, and as you
Yeah.
get older, you become a little bit more open to the fact of, you know what? That doesn't have to be the way it is, And
Mhm.
here you are, you've written two books after those kind of messages given to you when you're younger. Now, Life After Breath, so that's around the NDE. And then you said Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. That's more of the wisdom or the meaningfulness around what
The
happened to you.
NDE. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to make that clear again because that's really interesting. So yeah, if you could give just kind of can you give just a general idea? So, because I like to sometimes just look at it from a whole perspective of you have this last breath here on earth.
Hmm.
There's the suffering or the suffocation. Unfortunately, it's some terrible words, but it's just sometimes we go through that to get to the next side.
Mm.
Sometimes when you hear about people just dying in their sleep from a heart attack, it's almost like, oh, they got lucky. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially if
Yeah.
you have a
It's a
strong belief
piece.
system, it's a
Mhm.
peaceful transition, right?
Yeah.
But yours was a little bit harder at the end. It sounds almost like the same thing when I talk to people who've had drowning experiences. They can be a little bit traumatic, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna go. I'm just wondering if you can give an overview of what happened and kind of the experience that you had.
Yeah. Well, like I said before, I was a literal child in a playground, and we'll get into some of the allegorical symbology that's highlighted in my second book. But from a pure narrative, linear standpoint, just to kind of spell it out, suffocated, you know, felt myself going down the slide on the floor, the slide after climbing the ladder, and I was completely um, irresponsive to people trying to call my name. Prior to that, I felt myself ascending to this endless euphoria of light that I knew was, the epicenter of all of creative force, which some would call God or the center of the universe. But it was just, sometimes in life we have experiences, but there almost seems to be a cap of how good we can feel because we're still bio-neural physiological beings. And on the other side, there was no limitation of euphoria. And to me, that's really what I felt. It was like this endless, eternal apex of euphoria. I was aware of a palace that was right beside the right side of my brain, which I knew really was a representation of God, but it was so bright that I wasn't able to even look at it. I could see angels within the palace. I was aware also of my spirit guides that, were there with me at this time, and I felt them coming down with me as I was on the floor. And my guides were a male and female guide. They were the absolute most beautiful beings that I could possibly describe. And, in seeing my guides, I felt like, oh my Lord, I can't believe that I forgot that you were with me at all times. I felt like I had a lot of blinders on in this lifetime, but we are much more than what we think, and there's a lot of transparency of our lives. The record button is always on from the satellites in the heavens. But when I saw my guides, it felt like a tremendous reunion, and I just felt like all of that fear and suffering that I had in my NDE, dissipated. And I also felt a very high vibratory field which, to me was a Christ consciousness. Many near-death experiencers will, expressing Jesus themselves, and to me this was deeper. I think Jesus is a representation of a consciousness, as we all are. And when I was in this field, I just became, I had a capacity to let go of a lot of my fears as to questions of what would I look like, what would my parents react to things, and all those fears of suffocations. And I was just put in this realm of eternal knowing that all was well, will be well, is well. And I cannot describe the amount of peacefulness that I had within that realization and being in this field of awareness. Because in our life, as Lao Tzu says, when you're in the future, you're promoting anxiety, or in your past, it promoted depression. It's being in this eternal moment where we're able to really find peace and contentment, which is a great crux that I utilize within my mindfulness work in therapeutic practice. But on the floor, after encountering my guides, which, I think spirit guides, when I saw them, I was just like, I cannot believe that these beautiful beings were invested in myself. It took me quite some time to remember that.
Hmm.
But, the spirit realm doesn't look down at us, it looks up at us.
Hmm.
It's not how it's very paradoxical, where at times, it would feel like, imagine like the biggest Hollywood celebrity crush that you have, or someone in history that you most admire. And then imagine that person having the same degree of opinion towards yourself, times 1,000. It's strange but familiar at the same time. But again, my body was on the floor, lifeless. People were calling my name. I wanted to shake them and grab them and tell them that I was okay. But again, I felt myself on a soul level next to my body on the ground. I was able to also see their auric fields and their guides around them too.
Wow.
And the people that were there with me at the playground, I just knew them from such a deeper level that went far beyond the surface. I mean, like one of the guys is like a CPA type, you just figure like a conventional guy. I actually was afraid of the guy. He was one of like my babysitter spouses that, would take me to place and stuff like that. He was like a big kind of burly guy. But seeing him, I was just like, wow, like everyone is spiritual. That's not something monopolized by a select few. And
Right.
there's a sacredness in all beings at the core. And then slowly I looked up and I just saw an endless sea of angels that were floating right in front of me. And these angels were different than the spirit guides, where they had a lot less human characteristics. The guides felt more earth-based, but the angels that I saw were completely. just they didn't have a sense of self. There wasn't any. It was almost like the Minions movie where they're all kind of like the same, but they were just there sending love, sending warmth, sending energy. And then eventually I was able to encounter my own soul family, which it's kind of like a theater of life and we play different roles, but we're connected to them on the other side, and then I was able to have that classic life review, which you could say you were 3 years old. That must have been the shortest film, in history. But I would say to counter that, it's not a matter of the years of your life. It's really a matter of the life within your years.
Mm,
And so I was able to really understand myself through the eyes of those around me. But this life review transcended, a lot of different other what we call past lives, and the ones that really were most highlighted really were the most congruent with my near-death experience. As I always say, from completion we begin, and I have a theory that most people have near-death experience. It's usually related to some degree of some type of karma from a past life for various different reasons. But yeah, provided autonomy, if I would stay or go on the other side, and which is rare. Most near-death experience, I would rough estimate probably 70% of end of ears are told it's not your time. There's other karmic, things to work out. But I was, just given that option, and
mm,
I was showed myself a premonition of speaking in front of a lot of people and helping people. Not necessarily helping people, but just being a messenger of this,
mm,
um, and people just remembering who they are. And I just saw, wow, as beautiful as the heaven is, it'll always be there. But the capacity to integrate this in this life is bigger than heaven. And from that, I decided to stay and woke up in a hospital bed, and the rest is history in a sense. That's more the
wow.
abridged version, and obviously I expand that a lot more in both of my books. But for
Hmm.
time's sake, that's a little bit of
Yeah.
the, you know,
That's usually
things that
why,
happen.
yeah, that's usually why I ask you to go an overview because I know there's so much, we get so deep. So many times I'll have a near-death experience on, and they'll go into a piece of their near-death experience and it's like, you know what? You're actually the first I've explained this to in any show, and yet they've done a bunch of interviews, and I'm like, how did you forget? It's so expansive that there's even things that start to come back, even when they're recalling it,
Yeah,
because some people say they feel like they were there 100 years. Some people say it felt like 10 minutes. Like the time is different from here,
yeah.
and so that is one thing. There's just a few questions. So first of all, I always say, I appreciate when people share these. I always think it takes a lot. It's a personal experience, and it's something that there are people who go through their whole life who've had an NDE and don't even talk about it. And the reason is because it's so personal and close to them that they
Mhm.
may not even feel like it's necessary to explain or talk about. So I do appreciate when people do share their experience. So thank you for that. Um, what I
Yeah,
found,
well,
yeah,
I'm
sorry, go
sorry.
ahead.
What I'd say with near-death experiences, what I'd encourage is to really reflect a quote by Pablo Picasso, which is the purpose of life is to find your gift, and the meaning of life is to give it away. And near-death experiences are gifts for other people to hear. They really are
Mm,
sacred treasures, and that's when you could really find a lot of meaning through letting this experience go at the appropriate time and sharing it, with others.
yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And again, it's something that I just feel like it is a personal event. So just recalling it, I know it happened when you were 3, but
Mhm.
it sounds extensive. And it actually, one other thing I thought about before I asked this other question was I was thinking today about like my 2-year-old saw Santa the other day, and she was so excited, right? She was just so excited, and the whole scene was magical. We got pictures done and all this, and I started thinking to myself about why kids love Santa Claus, why kids love Harry Potter, why kids love fantasy, why we're
Mhm.
so obsessed with this idea of something more magical than what we're sometimes experiencing here. And it came to me like a download that we are more magical, that we are
Mhm.
more that actually is existence, that's beyond what we're doing. And I thought, well, that's probably why kids they see Santa and they see the reindeer flying and everything, and
Mhm.
they're like, oh, of course, it's true, right? Like
Yeah.
they're because they're experiencing from the beyond. Like I'm just started thinking about this today because I was or yesterday because I was thinking I think it's why even adults to this day love Christmas. They hear a Christmas song and they get, it's not always that way, but a lot of times, because some of us have trauma around Christmas and holidays and things like that. But for a lot of us, just the idea of magic or something more magical than what we're experiencing, I think is something that we're attracted to. I didn't know if you felt the same way based
No,
on the fact that
absolutely.
you had that experience. Yeah.
Not only that, but I had a chapter in my second book, which is titled like Finding Your Superpower.
Mm,
And I highlighted that same exact download, which shows you that we're all really connected to a similar kind of grid. This obsession that we have with Marvel characters or Harry Potter, like you mentioned, I mentioned that. Although obviously it's been a little bit more controversial, but we're not going to get into that for the specific reasons. But Harry Potter, we grew up in that kind of generation, and that was something that we were drawn to. I think it's foreign for us to really, accept realities as others will state it, because I think really people who are tuned in understand that imagination is reality.
mm,
But we're taught that regurgitation is reality and to not imaginate. And if you do have an imagination, you need to be medicated. Um, you know, but I will always really reflect that at anything. This conversation right now was an imagination. Someone was able to really think of Zoom, the internet, computers, chairs, all of reality was once an imagined thought. So
mm,
we all are living in an imagination. The question is what things you want to attach to, the things that are temporary in their nature, or the things that will go on. And
mhm.
kids oftentimes are tuned into the things that matter. And, sadly, the world hasn't evolved because they're so attached to the things that are temporary in nature, and not enough of
Mm.
the things that will last far beyond their existence.
Yeah. It also makes me look at who we are in 2024 going into 2025. And, we'll both only be here for probably maximum of 100 years if we make it to that point. And then you
Right.
think, what is the world like in 500 or 1,000 years? What happened during the pyramids? How did we do that? You start to, like, my mind
Mm.
goes in these different directions of
Yeah.
what is our imagination now and what is fantasy and what could be real in terms of what we see as real, because real just keeps changing, right?
Oh my God.
Even some days where I
Innovation.
think about dinosaurs walking around the earth, I go, did that really happen? Oh yeah, they found bones. Like that's a real thing. Imagine that. Imagine just walking outside and seeing dinosaurs walking around. Like that's
Yeah.
just to me, that's like it's crazy, really. So
It's mind-blowing.
mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I really, I was listening to Christmas music and I was getting that feeling and I thought, why am I so excited about that? What is it? Where's that excitement coming from? And I'm like, maybe it's because that's what we all deep down truly know could be real or is real. Because what is real, this is just what we're experiencing as real right now.
Mhm.
But the biggest thing is you go to this other realm and imagination is reality. Well, if imagination is reality, especially in the other realm, because from what I've been told, people who've crossed over say, what you think you see, like it's instant, right? Everything is
Mhm.
so, you know, it's there. We are in this physical reality, but then there's the question, is there other physical realities? And are those physical realities different from our physical reality? Do
Mhm.
dragons exist somewhere? Like my
Yeah.
brain goes into like 100 different directions, but
Yeah.
and
Yeah. It
some
could
people
really go
see it,
down the rabbit
yeah,
hole.
some
Yeah.
people see it as woo woo and crazy. Maybe I just lost a whole bunch of the audience, but the point though is that it, we're limiting ourselves always by limiting ourselves. If we're just seeing everything as is, okay, well, that's your experience. We can keep living it, do our 100 years and see what comes. But I really truly believe that we evolve into something more and there's a lot more coming on. And one of the questions I was going to ask you is when you were there, well, you wouldn't have had a fear of death at 3 years old, but did you know immediately that we exist beyond this realm when this happened? Was it a knowingness like, oh, right, this isn't where I'm
Yeah.
not just Jacob, I'm more.
It was a tremendous relief, that inner realization.
Hmm.
Um, and I was able just to let go of the ego, of Jacob, which again, death and rebirth are very much related in the same way. Much like people like Eckhart Tolle, the Buddha, a lot of people who've had transformative experiences. Oftentimes, it was started or ignited by some type of crisis which led to a transformation. But really, to really find the eternal self, you must be willing to let go of yourself. And that's where it's not so much the death of the body, that allows us to have eternity. It's letting go of the ego, allow us to really connect to higher awareness, higher consciousness. And that's could happen in NDE, and it doesn't necessarily have to be. NDEs are just a shakeup of, the physiological body and allowing the mind to really open up and to connect to higher realms. But, I think really by getting out of our own way, we could really expand our awareness and not be as limited. But it's very countercultural. In our world, we're taught the more houses you have, the more money you have, the more that you are, and you have to sweat for every yard that you get. You have to earn everything. And the spirit realm, you already are. You already are, always will be, always have been connected to a greater source. We all are divine sparks, and so there's nothing that we have to do to be. We just simply have to. It's a process of becoming less that we become more in a sense.
Wow.
Less
Like that.
interference,
Yeah.
um, less barriers, less attachments that we're able to really open up, connectivity.
You and I are sitting here talking to each other using
Hmm?
this method of seeing each other. Did it look similar to this, or was it from a different, like it was like a bird's eye view, or how could you describe how you were visually seeing things?
Visually, it was all in front of me. It says like literally in front of me. But what I would say is it was tremendously different. I'll give an example. Right now, we have a lot of colors that we're seeing, and really a lot of the colors are based on the premise of the colors that we get from the rays of the sun. That's the light, a reference that we have. That's where the light colors, are in their range are limited by. On the other side, obviously, there is no physical sun, but there is the eternal light of God. And when you're on the other side, those rays are much different than this realm.
Mm.
And I'll leave it there. But also, I know you're a man that does like nature and does like, allegory. I've really learned that we could learn a lot from nature. And so just as the planet needs the sun to survive, I really think to thrive, this world needs each of our lights to be shining and for people to remember who they are, what they're connected to. And if more people did that, we'd have a lot more light to lean into that would cast its beauty on the darkness that comes forward. So, but the color ranges were a lot different, more profound, more rich. It just had a lot more depth to them. As beautiful as a man as you are, Joe, and no offense, it just is a different realm. It's that we it's just it's unlimited, but it is undescribable because there's no contextual comparisons, despite however innovative AI is getting with some of this stuff, which is pretty cool. The colors that we have are, do not do justice on the other side. But the visualizations, everything was literally right in front of me, which was a mind, what, from one sense that, heaven, yes, it felt like a million miles away, but it's right overlaying this reality. The angels were right there at the playground, overlaying this reality. So it's like you take a little dial and just turn it up just a tad. All these things are around us at all times. It's just like
Mm.
amazing, and I've had other experiences like where I've gotten really into TM or a time where I'm not endorsing any type of hallucinogenic or marijuana, but in my you know, probably early 20s, I did this, and you just like understand there's like so many different layers of reality. This is a very dense form, but you kind of like get out of your own way, open up a little bit, and you start to see things opening up right in
Hmm.
front of you from other realms. And it's pretty cool, but again, it would be very hard to function, because imagine you're trying to like pay attention, you have every single possible radio station on at the same time, trying to listen. It's very hard. So this reality we have to kind of be very unidimensional in what we're, listening to because it could be overwhelming with all the different channels and stations.
Yeah.
of other realms, you know.
Yeah, I've had other people experience that and tell me different experiences they had with doing plant medicine and things like that, and just how they've seen things a little bit different. And some of them had near-death experiences, and they
Mhm.
also had those. You mentioned that you had different experiences, thereafter. You kind of fell in and out a little bit. Did that continue up? I'm trying to kind of see how you got into the work you're doing. So you're a therapist and you do hypnotherapy and
Mhm.
as you said, a general form of therapy. Um, I'm wondering
Mental
if,
health therapy. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, mental health therapy.
yeah.
Do you think that your experience when younger and the experiences afterwards, these little things the moments you were having in life, did it kind of lead you into this directive work, or how did that start to transform?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people ask, how do I find my purpose? And I oftentimes, think that there's a big correlation between pain and purpose. And this was an incredibly euphoric experience, but it was living that was hard. Dying was, easy, minus the suffocation part, obviously. It was living that was hard and feeling very disenfranchised, different, being called weird, as a
Mm-hmm.
kid, which as an
Mm-hmm.
adult, that's a great compliment,
Yeah.
regardless of what was going on in the political campaign that we just saw this year. But weird is like you're making a difference in the world by just you're being you. And that's a blessing. Who wants to be normal and to be a leaf in water? I mean, what legacy are you leaving? So weird is the greatest thing and greatest service you could do for humanity. But I would say it was pain that was really a doorway to purpose, but also, seeing that my life was in one way taken from me and given back to myself, and I understood that God was the giver of eternal life, of life itself. And, I had an experience in the playground, when I was just a child in the eternal playground of God. And I recognized that was one of our tenets of responsibility. A lot of people try to intellectualize God, but to embody God is really how to make a difference. And I understood that we're here to really be our brothers and sisters keeper within the eternal playground of God and to be there for others as much as we can. And so clients come into my, office sometimes feeling out of touch with life, sometimes not wanting to live, and hopefully for them is to really find that connection to life and to give back what I was given in
Mm.
my NDE. It could be givers and takers. And obviously to give, you got to take, but my near-death experience really put me on the road to be of service, to others, which I think that's the God embodiment that we could all have, is just to be there for another, and to just be love, be light, to make someone's day a little bit brighter as much as we can.
So you use, uh, you're a therapist and you speak with individuals. Do you do this generally just in person, or do you do it online as well, or is it just something you do?
I do it both, but I also do what's called continuing educational classes for therapists. And so we're coming at a really cool time where back in the day, if I were to speak about this as a client, they probably would institutionalize myself or put myself in the blue room. Like I really do credit a psychiatrist like Dr. Raymond Moody, who really coined this term. But what's really cool now is not only is this accepted, but I'm actually training other therapists through continuing educational classes to understand this and many other type of paranormal phenomenon, to make the paranormal more normal and to lose the stigma that we have in terms of labeling things as psychotic, with which actually might be things that might be of the psychic realm,
Hmm.
and so giving, therapists more of that spiritual psychoeducation to empower a client, because when a client comes into our office, many times they're drowning and maybe we are that last piece that they have to hold on to. And if we push them even further in the water, how are we helping someone? So through
Yeah.
information, we can empower others, and that's what I try to do within, my work. But it's certainly incredible times to be alive at this time, where right now this stuff is embraced and accepted in some of the, prior archaic viewpoints in the mental health system. It's starting to have a slow evolution like everything else, which is pretty cool to see.
Yeah. I think I mentioned this to you, but I do have a background in social work as well, a little bit. And so just knowing that you've had the near death experience and the fact that you're working in
Hmm.
therapy, it's quite a combination because you see things, you can give insights from your own personal experience. And I think
Mhm.
that probably that really helps a lot of people. And I think that's quite a powerful combination of the two worlds.
Yeah.
Because, and it's not to take away from people who are just therapists and they haven't had a near-death experience. People have all different experiences, right? And they have life experiences, and that can be a lot too. That can really help people, especially if
Mm.
they've gone through some trauma and things like that. I just think that's really interesting. Do people contact you on your website, or how do they get in contact with you? I usually try to find that out as
Yeah,
well.
they contact me usually through my website, jacobelcooper.com. You could find me on, Instagram, Facebook, and both my books you could find on my website or through Amazon. But yeah, it's certainly a unique tightrope that I try to walk where, obviously within our own education, the one of the biggest, most significant things is to meet people where they're at, not
Mm,
where you're at. And so self-disclosure is helpful in certain situations, but I'm not like someone who's going to come up to my clients and their loved one dies and say, I've had this NDE and they're fine. That may be factually true, but they
right.
may be fine, but the client may be not. And so I do everything I can in my power to meet people where they're at. But at the same time, it's making changes from more of a macro standpoint in terms of educating other therapists to understand this so that if a client does come into their office, it could be a session that could potentially change the trajectory of a client's life from disempowerment to empowerment, which
Mm,
then will affect others that they encounter. Yeah.
wow. I completely agree. I mean, that's you always have to meet people where they're at because everybody comes at things from and what can help one person completely doesn't help another person. So
Yeah.
you always have to, and I respect that kind of work that you're doing. One of the questions that I kind of leave at the end of our conversation, I always try to ask everybody. You've kind of answered it a few different times in different ways, but I generally try to get a general sense of if you can really dig in and find, any kind of meaning is around to why are we here on this realm?
Mm-hmm.
Why have I come here to do this? I know you came back. You came back. You made the decision to come back at such a young age. But some of us don't have that. We're just here. And I'm just wondering if you can give any insight on that as to why we're here.
Yeah, it's a multi-layered question that I'm often asked, and it's hard to have unidimensional um, answer to it. But from an objective and subjective standpoint, I would say the simplest way is to really experience love and to remember who we are. The other side, love is a common thing that people talk about, what they experience. But what they also don't always highlight is on the other side, there's a subjectivity to it. And the things that we do love is what we continue on the other side. So you want a better heaven, find a better life. Find the
Mm,
things that you love over here. Don't just wait to heaven to experience euphoria. Your eternity is enhanced right here, right now. And so I would say don't gloss over the things that you might view as trivial. Um, I don't know. I always give this example. In every reading that I get, my grandfather is always fishing in my backyard. I live on not on the water. I'm not Jesus, but probably next to the water. And that's his thing. That's what he's doing on the other side. He loved that over here. He does it over there. And so to not, sometimes we associate spirituality with just living in an ashram, burning incense, connecting to chakras all day. And that could be a part of it, but I think spirituality is really maximizing the relationships that we have, the interests that we have, the activities that we do. I always bring this example where people ask me, how do you find God? I would just say, find your enthusiasm, because the word enthusiasm has the word entheos, which means the divine within. And when you're feeling joy, and that's a subjective basis. I mean, you asked me to go fishing. Until I'm blue in the face, I might accept that I'm doing that activity. I don't necessarily know if I'd find joy in it. I think joy is a subjective thing, and we all have a different engine. But right now we have Teslas, so I guess some people don't have engines. You get the point. But everyone has their own bliss, so to speak, and their own roadways to that. So I would just say honor that and go with that, and don't compare yourself to other people. Know what works with you, what gets you into a better place, and work with that. That's a part of your heaven. How we live
mm,
over here is, many of the things that will carry over there.
yeah. I just want to put my 2 cents on that. What I find fascinating is you're someone who's crossed over, you've seen the other side, you've experienced this other side of euphoria of
Mhm.
what we truly are. And when asked this question, you state to create heaven here, to
Mhm.
find your enthusiasm, things like that. The reason why that's important is because, you know, when someone's listening to a near-death experience, right? Some
Mhm.
of some of it's curiosity, some of it's because maybe they had an experience and they want to reflect on their own.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's just by chance they run into it and they're meant to hear it at this point. But in other times it's because they're not experiencing heaven. They're
Mhm.
experiencing the opposite of that. Sometimes people aren't happy with where they're at in life and they think that's a better option, and that's definitely not, right? Because we're here
Mhm.
for a purpose and a reason,
Mhm.
and the way that you've just described it is perfect because what you're saying is to realize we're more than what we are, essentially,
Mhm.
and to create that heaven here while we're here, right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
that's the whole reason why we're here. So, yeah, I just got a lot out of that one. So that was pretty good. That was a good way of answering.
Remembering who you are too. There is a
Yeah.
lot of power of belief in behaviors. And, yes, you could experience anxiety, depression, all those things, but you're not those things. We're experiencing those things, but, those aren't the entirety of our being. And
Mm,
once we're able to really see ourselves from a soul level, we understand that the soul is a quantum, large, eternal thing. And it didn't come here to play small. And so I think a lot of people, they ask, when you're coming from a soul, it's a very expansive energy. When you're coming from a place of fear, of sadness, well, those things, that might um, just kind of lessen how you play. And sadness necessarily isn't a bad thing. I think to feel you need to heal, so that's significant. So do not bypass the human part. The emotions are really pathways to healing, to evolution, to developing empathy for those that you encounter, and they could allow you to find meaning as well. So allow two things to be true at the same time. Allow yourself to be human and experience emotions, but also understand who you are at the very nature that all this is temporary and all this is part of the school of life that we encounter, and our pain is a part of our growth and our purpose.
Jacob, this has been amazing. To feel you need to heal. I'm going to take that and run with it because that's powerful. I want to thank you so much for being on Soul Inspired. This has been amazing. I think you could be a return guest. I say this to a few people because I feel like we could dig into even other concepts around everything that's happened. But I really do appreciate you, and I appreciate your experience and sharing it with everybody today.
Thanks, Joe. An honor to be here. I
Thank you so
appreciate it.
much. I always turn to the audience, say, please continue to like, share, and subscribe. Continue to subscribe and share these stories from the Soul Inspired. That's why we're doing it. We're doing it to enhance everyone's life, and then I can continue to get amazing guests like Jacob on. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.